to spend an hour taking a look at the other tragedy that happened over a year ago now in the Gulf of Mexico, which is dead, is catastrophically polluted. Probably 90% of the oil from the Macondo blowout is sitting on the bottom of the Gulf. We have not had a hurricane of any substantial size or intensity in the Gulf since the disaster. They all went up the Atlantic coast or down toward Yucatan last year. It was very unusual. With us to talk about the Gulf, its current condition, and the discoveries that he has made, which suggest very strange genetic engineering of bacteria in the Gulf, is Michael Edward. And he's been with us before. He is an independent researcher, a citizen scientist, as I call them, and he is coming to us now from the Gulf area. Are you there, Michael?
I'm here. Thank you, Jeff.
Welcome back.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back. Love to get out the truth and let people know what's going on.
Yeah, well, what is going on for sure is the rather tragic fact that the Gulf movement, let's just call it the Gulf movement, of citizens, activists, and those who are trying to help, is shattered. It is not just in disarray, it is hopelessly fragmented, and BP must be laughing with great glee at the inability of people to come together and put egos and scams and hustles and mixed agendas aside and work together and pull together and really have some kind of political clout. There's nothing going on now. Leave it to the local governments to cover this up. They will, and they do. So according to the ads I've seen, everything is fine in the Gulf. The beaches are clean. The fishermen are doing great. And in fact, the U.S. Army just bought a whole raft of Gulf fish and seafood for the troops. So anyway.
Well, as you were saying, the whole idea is when you're having a cover-up, the first thing you have to do is break apart the local citizenry. You have to make sure that they can't join together and have a voice. And that's right. Exactly what's going on. It doesn't matter what group, what name you put on. Local groups don't have a voice because they're pretty much shut down before they can get to anybody. And that's what's going on in the Gulf. They don't want the truth coming out. And it's not going to come out from multimedia, typical media, radio or TV.
No chance. No way.
No, they won't allow it. And that's part of the cover-up. And the only way you get the truth, Jeff, is to get it from the people on the scene, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this. You've been in media for so many years, more than 2 decades. You understand that probably more than I do. But if you shut down the local voice and don't allow it to be heard, then the truth will never get out. And the truth of what's going on in the Gulf is something that they can't allow to get out. Even your previous guest, Dr. Bill Deagle, he was talking about a pandemic.
Right.
And, I thought at first, well, he's talking about what's going to happen with Japan. But I was listening very carefully. I wrote down what he said, and he's talking about how the radiation, will spread and how it speeds what he was saying was going to be a pandemic. And then you know what he just said about half an hour ago on your show? He said it's just like when they put these artificial organisms in the Gulf of Mexico that eat the oil.
Right.
They actually are speeding what he called disevolution. And then he said, so when you get a radiation source and a weakened host, of which we are, a weakened immunity host, our immunities are so badly weakened here from decades of the Gulf of Mexico being an oil septic tank already. Then we're even more weakened since almost a year ago.
Right, the herd immunity factor.
Then he said you get the free radicals and the mutations and the virus. And he said that was the pandemic, and he even said, this is your guest. He's a doctor. He knows what he's talking about.
Well, absolutely. The bacteria and viral agents will have a field day. Not only will there be no immune system or little immune system to put up a fight, But with a radioactive background, the mutation potential of these organisms is obviously increased. So that's all it takes.
Absolutely.
And remember,
But,
each
part of the
virus.
factor is when you're dealing with artificial, or as the nice term puts it, genetically engineered. When you're dealing with genetics that are basically lab created,
Right.
or at least lab enhanced at the absolute minimum.
Yeah.
This is called bioremediation. And Jeff, it's nothing new because our last show back in November, we spoke about that, about how they can take natural bacteria and they can enhance it. And that's exactly what they've done. That's called genetic engineering.
It's all a tragedy, no matter how you slice it. And I'm really amazed and appalled that the bulk of the oil, probably 90% of it, was homogenized, turned into kind of a large mucus mass by these dispersants right at the source of the blowout, and ended up in these huge plumes which by and large have settled down toward the bottom, if not the bottom of the Gulf. Now the first hurricane that comes through there is going to stir this up, and the toxicity is going to come up as moisture. It's going to be spread all over the south, southeast, maybe up into New England, and it's going to come down in terms of precipitation. We're going to see dead plants. We're going to see sick people. Same old thing. The Gulf is a toxic septic tank, as you said, of latent and pending disease and physical contamination by chemicals, and worse.
Well, and it's just like you said, worse. It goes beyond, because it hasn't been stirred up, so to speak.
No.
Whether it was weather control or whatever, the Gulf is kind of like a big bathtub, and the bacteria and the chemicals and all these interactions are just multiplying, and then you have, as you said, more mutations. You have more what they call horizontal gene transfer going from one species to another, which is really no different than H1N1 swine flu type of thing, except in this case, it really is kind of like brewing it in a bathtub, because they pretty much cut off the Gulf Loop, the normal circulation, last summer. What are we going to have this summer? We didn't have any hurricanes last summer, whether that was deliberate, which I believe, that was weather manipulation, which those technologies exist. It's even, you can go look at that on the internet. You can see.
They've been after that as a budding science since right after World War II. And you're going to tell me, and anybody, in the last 50, 60 years, they haven't just about perfected it? And I say you're right, Michael, and I agree.
Well, it's the first time that we haven't had a hurricane come directly up the Gulf of Mexico last year in hurricane season.
No coincidences,
were predicting, I believe, 12 named storms,
right,
and at least 4 of them were supposed to come in the Gulf.
Exactly right. Now, tell us about your research and what you've discovered. Now, we do remember that there was talk about bacteria being the absolute silver bullet to get in there and take care of this massive oil spill. It was more than that, but what about the bacteria? What got you interested in this, Michael, and what have you discovered?
Well, something that the oil industry has used for quite a while, and even before synthetic ways to create viruses and bacteria came along, about a decade ago is when they first started to really come out with that. But it's called bioremediation. And even in China, in 2003, they came out with a lot of government-sponsored genetic engineering to enhance previously natural bacteria that they had discovered, to enhance it genetically to eat up oil or the gases that come from natural crude oil faster. And that basically describes what's happened in the Gulf of Mexico. It's a total lab enhancement and a synthetic enhancement to cause natural bacteria, and especially in the Gulf of Mexico, which is a warm body of water, has a lot of natural bacteria that normally wouldn't eat oil. What they've done is introduce and played around with genetics in viruses, introduce viruses which naturally attack natural bacteria genetically and cause them to go ahead and eat up oil or eat up gas such as benzene. And that's the bottom line of what's going on in the Gulf, and it's been going on since May of last year.
Okay, hold on. We have to take a break. When we come back, I'd like to ask the obvious journalistic question. Who is doing it? And why are they doing it? And who's paying for it? Back in a minute with Michael Edward. Do click on his name. Go to his website. He has done some really amazing work. Back in a minute. Okay, and we're back talking with Michael Edwards. So delicate is nature's balance, and so destroyed is the Gulf. The entire food chain in the Gulf is trashed, compromised. This issue of these horrible ads saying that the beaches are clean, the fish are great, fishing's great, people are happy. It shows people in restaurants. It's an unbelievable lie. Here's another story, just to show you how delicate this is. We're talking about Fukushima radiation, the destroyed Gulf of Mexico. In Canada's Fraser River, a mysterious illness has killed millions of Pacific salmon, and scientists have a new hypothesis finally about why. They say the wild salmon are suffering from viral infections, very similar to those linked to some forms of leukemia and lymphoma. So cancer in the salmon, and it's spread by a virus. Now, that should tell you right away that medical science lies, because cancer can be spread by a virus in people. Royal Rife proved that in 1931. So anyway, the bottom line is we are destroying literally the globe. Wherever you look, there's destruction by humankind. Go ahead, Michael, please.
Well, that falls right through my slogan. It's on my internet site. Wherever the Gulf wind blows and wherever the Gulf water flows, because it's just not an isolated incident that only has to do with the Gulf of Mexico. It might have started here with their bioremediation and lab experiment, which is basically what it is, but it doesn't stay here. All the oceans are connected. The Gulf of Mexico into the Atlantic, and it goes all around the world on different currents. And the same thing with the air, with the jet stream. Jeff, what affects us here will eventually affect everybody in the world, and that's no different than what's happening in Japan to affect everybody else with the wind flow and the water currents and such around the rest of the world. It's all the same thing, but it started in the Gulf almost within a week, a year ago.
Uh-huh.
But, I don't expect, Jeff, anybody to believe anything I'm saying. But if I told you, and I could quote an executive, a chief operating officer of BP, that he turned around and said that there's a new form of microbiology attacking the oil plume and using it as a food source, what would you think of that? What is a new form of microbiology? And the man who made that statement is Mike Utzler. He's the chief operating officer of BP's Gulf Coast Restoration. He was filmed by BBC, British Broadcasting. And their very famous interviewer on television there, Stephen Fry. And they caught him back in September of last year making that statement that there's a new form of microbiology that's attacking the oil plume and using it as a food source. So don't believe me. Go ahead and believe the BBC spokesman who was cut off on that interview as soon as he opened his mouth and said that.
Wow. All right. So what happens with this new form of microbiology? What do you know that it's doing or not doing? Do we have any data that we can take to the bank, so to speak?
Yeah, the data that most Western doctors are trying to collect is only what they've been told, and that's okay. Corexit is a toxic brew, which is probably true. But the thing is, nobody knows what's in Corexit, and the only way for them to bioremediate the oil and even the gas, such as benzene and methane, that comes out of natural crude oil. The only way for them to combat that is not through natural bacteria. They have to have some kind of supercharged bacteria. In fact, there was Samantha Joy who said back in January of this year, when the reports came out that all the gas was being eaten up by a certain bacteria, she said, well, that would have to be a superhuman bacteria to do that, because the Gulf doesn't naturally have, especially copper, to support that kind of bacteria to do that kind of job. Well, it ends up in rain tests coming from the Gulf of rainwater that's coming out of the Gulf that's on land and ending up in pools and in people's yards.
Uh-huh.
The tests since last summer, multiple tests, have all shown the same thing: a high concentration of certain heavy metal elements, of which that's copper and iron.
How are they getting into the Gulf? They must be being sprayed.
Well, that's the only way it can happen, because you only have in a body of salt water, and especially a warm one like the Gulf, all the scientists have told me that you have slight trace elements,
Uh-huh.
such as that, but you don't have those kind of concentrations. It doesn't happen. So here we go down to, okay, we know that they've got to have these genetically enhanced or genetically engineered, or let's just come out and say it for what it is. It's synthetic lab-created genomes in viruses and bacteria for the purpose of eating up the oil, the crude oil itself, the tar kind of garbage, as well as the gases. So let's get specific. What kind of bacteria do that? Well, there are some natural bacteria that do that, and I've isolated it down into 4 types. And my testing, by the way, has not been in the U.S. I've deliberately sent my samples months ago outside of North America so I could get some real results.
Yeah, smart. Very smart. All right, hold on, Michael.
To be honest, Jeff.
Yeah, hold on a sec, please. We have to pause. Pick it right up there with Michael Edward in just a minute. As we do a look at the Gulf basically 1 year later, it's not a good picture, no matter what the PR commercials are telling you. Back in a minute. And we continue our conversation with Michael Edward about the Gulf. Michael, tell us more about your research. You sent it abroad to make sure you had an unadulterated response from the scientists involved with analyzing it. Are we talking about Frankensteinian types of microbes here, which could potentially swap genes with normal human bacteria, pathogenic or otherwise, and create a real new monster that we have to deal with in terms of a potential epidemic?
Well, that statement definitely is not an over-exaggeration. It's a reality. Let's get down to what are these bacteria, what are these oil-eating special things that are in the Gulf that they introduced. There are 2 natural bacteria The first one that I'll mention is a natural bacteria that would typically basically eat up hydrocarbons like aromatic hydrocarbons like benzene or methane. Now, the name of that natural bacteria is Pseudomonas alkalogenes, and it's scientifically it's a gram-negative bacteria. And what that means, why I want to emphasize that it's gram-negative, is because their cell wall makes them so that they're very hard for any kind of antibiotic or any kind of antibiotic-type drug to be able to be effective against them. Now, the second type is called Alcanovorax borchimensis, and it's also gram-negative, and that's the one naturally, in its natural form, that likes to eat up typical oil. The solid, more solid hydrocarbons that are not gaseous yet.
What was the Pseudomonas? What variety, what strain of Pseudomonas was it again?
Okay, it's Pseudomonas alkalogenes.
Right.
Alcaligenes.
There's a whole family of Pseudomonas bacteria, but okay, go ahead.
Yes, there is. There's a lot of them. But these two are the ones that, in our testing, we found out were prevalent in the Gulf water. These two natural ones. We found variants of these two. And of course, we have all the mainstream media news reports of before the end of last year how the oil itself was being eaten up, and then the first of this year how some kind of new bacteria was doing such a great job eating up all the methane and the benzene. Well, these are the two that they were referring to in their natural form. But here's the difference. We have new variants of these that are not in their natural form. They are not only reproducing, both of these, reproducing at an unbelievable rate, but they're basically eating up their food, which is either gas or oil, crude oil itself, at remarkable rates. And even the scientists like Terry Hazen and Samantha Joy have turned around and said, this is amazing that they can do this. This is not normal. And there's never been on record either one of these natural bacteria in their natural forms to ever eat up oil or gas at this kind of record. So obviously, they're not in their 100% natural form. That's the whole bottom line with it. And you think, okay, well, that's not so bad. BP or with the blessings of Washington, D.C., they've come up with a sensible biological way for them to use genetic engineered variants of these natural bacteria, kind of supercharge them genetically, and go ahead and eat up the oil. And you'd think right away, well, that's not such a bad thing. Well, if it got into living organisms, whether it be fish or mammals like porpoises and whales or humans, then it's not such a natural thing. And here's the scary part that happens when you mess around with the genetics in a lab and you engineer something to do what it normally couldn't do. You have what's called horizontal gene transfer. That means natural organisms will not respect their species barriers when you change their genetics. So you go from one species to another. Now, is that just with ocean species? No, it goes beyond that. What happens, Jeff, if you alter the genetics of, let's just say, one bacteria in an isolated pond? Well, who eats the bacteria? Or let's just say with a Gulf. That's a better example instead of a small pond, but to me it is a pond.
Right.
Okay, then you have the zooplankton who eat those bacteria. And who eat the zooplankton? And if they're genetically altered, it's going to go down the line. So who eats the zooplankton?
Goes right through the whole food chain.
The fish.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
And then the fish, who eats the fish after they die? The birds.
Mm-hmm.
And then who eats the birds when they're on land? And it just goes down and down the whole food chain, on land, in the sea, in the air, until it affects everything.
Well, once again,
this is the problem.
We're releasing something that we really don't understand and with no ability to recall it. It's simple.
And you can't even predict it. That's the worst part. Every scientist who knows anything about genetics, and I've spoken with so many of them in Spain, South America, even one here in the U.S. who won't allow me to, repeat that scientist's name because there's going to be repercussions if they tell the truth. Every one of them has said that this is a total unpredictable situation. And then even worse, your guest, Dr. Bill Deagler, in the first hour, add a little bit of radiation fallout to that, and you end up with unbelievable mutations beyond the mutations and especially horizontal gene transfer that happens of what's going on already in the Gulf. So where does this stuff end up, Jeff? It ends up in us.
Sure.
Right now, I've had some people allow me, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm just somebody living on the Gulf who wants to know what's going on. And I've researched it enough that I've been able to get to a couple doctors of people that I know where they have insisted that the doctors do what I told them about checking for especially these two natural types of bacteria that have been altered. And guess what, Jeff? In the last 2 weeks, all of a sudden we have a Texas clinic with some very highly specialized doctors who have come out and found the Pseudomonas alkalogenes, not only on skin but in blood. And we also have with this Alcanovorax borchimensis in the blood. And this is not just with those Texas doctors. Now
unreal.
It's with Dominican Republic doctors who have done the same tests of people who have gone down there for treatment.
Wow.
So, Jeff, it's in us. And this is the scary part. If it can't be controlled in a lab,
right,
how can it be controlled in our bodies, let alone a dolphin who is aborting babies, just like happens in Grand Isle, Louisiana?
Yep.
Out of about 40 women within the past 6 months that have become pregnant, more than 30 have spontaneously aborted.
Well, mammals
babies.
are mammals, and we're paying the price. This is really disgusting. Hold on, if you would, please, Michael. We do have to pause, and we shall continue. Okay, and we're back. Michael Edwards. Just insane experiments being done on us, ultimately, although we're not the primary target. Well, maybe we are. Ultimately, it's not a good situation down there. This work you have done, Michael, is extraordinary. Have you taken it to any university lab or anybody who would have an alleged detached view of the Gulf crisis and be able to look at this and give you some solid data to back up what you've found?
Not within North America. That's the reason that I went to South America and overseas. It was the only way I figured I could have unskewed results. And one particular professor in Spain who became involved was just absolutely flabbergasted that this was going on. And he's the one who gave me the sternest warning that if this is happening, we have such an uncontrolled and unpredictable situation that there wouldn't really be a whole lot of hope if it was allowed to go on the way that it appeared it was. And sadly, that's exactly what's happened. It's no different than allowing a nuclear reactor to melt down. It's the same thing when it comes to biology within the Gulf of Mexico. That's the sad part of it. You would expect it from a reactor, wouldn't you, Jeff? Okay, there's a mistake. You expect it to melt down if you screw up.
Yeah.
But when it's deliberately placed in something like the Gulf of Mexico to eat up oil, and there's no way to stop it,
that's insane. It's not sane thinking. It's not sane science. It's insane, and it's beyond malevolent. It's evil to the max. These people, it just it almost seems like the people at the top know something, that the planet only has so much time left and they just don't care about trying to maintain its integrity anymore. Otherwise, you have to come to the conclusion that they are completely insane.
Well, it's got to be one or the other. They must know
seems
something
like
or
it.
think they know something.
I don't know. They may think they do. This is so disconcerting. Now, I want to also point out that you mentioned the food chain. We are part of that food chain because we eat the fish, we eat the seafood, goes right into us. And you're seeing now people, just repeat this again, in two locations, the Dominican Republic and where else are people showing up with this stuff?
Yeah, well, where they went for tests, it was Texas and Dominican Republic.
Okay.
Where people I know, and I told the doctors what to look for when it came to the bacteria.
You had to tell, and well, at least they were open-minded enough.
One of the doctors said that would be impossible for the oil-eating type to be in a person, that it normally would only stay with fish. So, we're crossing species barriers. That's what the whole thing is about. And that particular one is the Alcanovorix borcumensis, and it was a variant of that. Now, the two that I named are the natural types, Jeff. And yes, they can help in bioremediation of oil and the gases from oil, but not at this rate. Even all the scientists have said that, that's impossible for these natural bacteria to do that. So the first thing to look for was if they had the equipment to look for variants of these natural bacteria, and that would be slightly different DNA differences. It could be as little as 1%, and that's all it takes. Can I give a quote from back of May?
You sure may.
Last year.
We have 6 minutes left, Michael. Please go right ahead.
Okay, let me give you a quote from a man who's considered really the number one bioremediation expert in the world. I mentioned him before. His name is Terry Hazen. Terry Hazen is from Lawrence Livermore Lab out in California. That's a government lab. Now, this is back in May of last year, right after Deepwater Horizon, happened, and we're not talking about any more than 3 weeks after. Now, listen to what he said. He said we could introduce a genetic material into indigenous bugs, or what he was talking about was bacteria, but he was saying bugs, via a bacteriophage. Now, let me explain that. A bacteriophage is the most common microorganism in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's actually a virus. It sounds like it's bacteria, but it's not. So he said we could introduce a genetic material into indigenous or natural bugs via a bacteriophage, which is a virus, and that's a virus that naturally infects bacteria. And he said we could do that to give local microbes DNA that would allow them to break down oil. Either that, or a lab could create a completely new organism that thrives in the ocean, eats oil, and needs a certain stimulant to live. Jeff, they told us what was going on a month after Deepwater Horizon sank.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Now, that's a quote from Terry Hazen. National Geographic published that quote. May 2010.
Well.
So all we can do is go by the experts, and on top of that, go ahead and go by our blood tests. Western doctors are baffled because they've been told it's all corrosive, it's all chemical toxins. nobody really has been testing for the bacterial part.
Right.
Now that I'm finally convincing some of them to go ahead and test for it, they're finding it. And I am not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm just somebody who lives on the Gulf, and I want answers.
You're damn right. Could this also be somehow swapping bacteria with Staphylococcus and other bacteria that are common on human skin and so forth?
Well, yeah, then you get into what's called colonization of these bacteria, different types, modified genetically or not. They'll join up with natural bacteria and get a problem called biofilms. Now, once you get biofilms, they're 1,000 times more resistant to antibiotics and antibiotic-type drugs. So you get into a worse situation when you get biofilms of these colonies of natural and genetically altered bacteria. It just turns into a nightmare.
Well, nightmare is certainly an appropriate word. This issue of the Gulf being destroyed and the lies, and I've seen these commercials on the internet, they're unbelievable. How many people do you think are sick and will become sick when the Gulf gets riled up again and all these poisons come up and all the bacteria come up? I mean, it's not summer yet. Hurricane season is supposed to be aggressive this year. Chances are at least one will move through the Gulf unless they don't want it to. And we suspect they have that ability to make those decisions, at least to a substantial degree. So what's going to happen? Year after year after year, this oil is going to continue to be stirred up via storms. It'll evaporate. It'll turn into precipitants over the south and southeast. People are going to become sick. Plants are going to die. Crops are going to be affected. We've seen all the stories. This looks to be just an incredibly tragic issue that no one seems to be able to see or imagine or wrap their minds around. And they don't want to.
Jeff, I've got friends and even family living all along the Gulf, and even some on the east coast of Florida, in Georgia, away from the coastline of the Gulf.
Right.
Everybody has what they call the flu. It's flu symptoms, but it's not the flu.
Wow.
And that's without exception. I've even got that with my daughter. She's got a lot of health problems, and today she, I think, I haven't heard yet, just delivered a child with pneumonia. And this is my daughter is not an unhealthy person.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, within, the last 6 months of this pregnancy, along with her neighbors in the middle of Georgia, Jeff. What I've been trying to warn everybody is, as bad as it is for us on the Gulf Coast, this is not staying here.
Agreed.
And I even spoke with Ian Crane on an interview today that'll be out on Monday in the UK, and he's been somebody who's spoken out against BP and what's going on in the Gulf from the United Kingdom. He turned around and said today, I think that we're starting to get what you've got coming our way. We have, certain types of fish and crabs and such dying along our coastline.
Well, no one knows for sure, but the evidence is certainly massively circumstantial that this is all linked together. I don't know how to prove it. No one's going to admit it, but you're doing remarkable things, and I hope you keep it up. Are people leaving? Are people who get it trying to get out of the Gulf area now to move to the West Coast where they can get radiation?
A lot have moved, but, the greater majority can't afford to move. They've lost their jobs, whether it's with the fishing industry or even the hospitality industry.
Right.
Then add on top of that, terrible economy from, the thieves who call themselves banks. It's not really a rosy picture. Everybody is basically on a survival mode. And it doesn't matter what community along the Gulf, but when you add to that, Jeff, the mental incapacity that comes with these bacterial infections, basically, that get into your blood and are on your skin, it affects you mentally. And a lot of people, Jeff, are giving up because they think there's no way to win. And that's the worst part.
Unbelievable. It just truly is. On top of now we have Fukushima, it just continues and continues and continues. Michael, thank you on behalf of all Americans who care, and especially those along the Gulf, for the work you're doing and the commitment you have to trying to at least individually affect change and bring hope and help to people. You're greatly appreciated by a lot of folks. So thanks, Michael. Good to talk to you.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity.
All righty. Good night.
Good night.
All right. There you go. Update on the Gulf. Not good. Spend an hour taking a look at the other tragedy that happened over a year ago now in the Gulf of Mexico, which is dead, is catastrophically polluted. Probably 90% of the oil from the Macondo blowout is sitting on the bottom of the Gulf. We have not had a hurricane.
Probably more than I do. But if you shut down the local voice and don't allow it to be heard, then the truth will never get out. And the truth of what's going on in the Gulf is something that they can't allow to get out. Even your previous guest, Dr. Bill Deagle, he was talking about a pandemic.
Right.
And, I thought at first, well, he's talking about what's going to happen with Japan. But I was listening very carefully. I wrote down what he said, and he's talking about how the radiation, will spread and how it speeds what he was saying was going to be a pandemic. And then you know what he just said about half an hour ago on your show? He said it's just like when they put these artificial organisms in the Gulf of Mexico that eat the oil.
Right.
They actually are speeding what he called disevolution. And then he said, so when you get a radiation source and a weakened host, of which we are, a weakened immunity host, our immunities are so badly weakened here from decades of the Gulf of Mexico being an oil septic tank already. Then we're even more weakened since almost a year ago.
Right. The herd immunity factor.
Then he said you get the free radicals and the mutations and the virus. And he said that was the pandemic. And he even said, this is your guest. He's a doctor. He knows what he's talking about.
Well, absolutely. The bacteria and viral agents will have a field day. Not only will there be no immune system or little immune system to put up a fight, but with a radioactive background, the mutation potential of these organisms is obviously increased. So that's all it takes.
Absolutely.
And remember,
part of the factor is when you're dealing with artificial, or as the nice term puts it, genetically engineered. When you're dealing with genetics that are basically lab created, or at least lab enhanced at the absolute minimum. Yeah. This is called bioremediation. And Jeff, it's nothing new because our last show back in November, we spoke about that, about how they can take natural bacteria and they can enhance it. And that's exactly what they've done. That's called genetic engineering.
It's all a tragedy, no matter how you slice it. And I'm really amazed and appalled at the bulk of any substantial size or intensity in the Gulf since the disaster. They all went up the Atlantic coast or down toward Yucatan last year. It was very unusual. With us to talk about the Gulf, its current condition, and the discoveries that he has made, which suggest very strange genetic engineering of bacteria in the Gulf, is Michael Edward. And he's been with us before. He is an independent researcher, a citizen scientist, as I call them, and he is coming to us now from the Gulf area. Are you there, Michael?
I'm here. Thank you, Jeff.
Welcome back.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back. Love to get out the truth and let people know what's going on.
Yeah, well, what is going on for sure is the rather tragic fact that the Gulf movement, let's just call it the Gulf movement of citizens, activists, and those who are trying to help, is shattered. It is not just in disarray, it is hopelessly fragmented, and BP must be laughing with great glee at the inability of people to come together and put egos and scams and hustles and mixed agendas aside and work together and pull together and really have some kind of political clout. There's nothing going on now. Leave it to the local governments to cover this up. They will, and they do. So according to the ads I've seen, everything is fine in the Gulf. The beaches are clean. The fishermen are doing great. And in fact, the U.S. Army just bought a whole raft of Gulf fish and seafood for the troops. So anyway.
Well, as you were saying, the whole idea is when you're having a cover-up, the first thing you have to do is break apart the local citizenry. You have to make sure that they can't join together and have a voice. And that's right. Exactly what's going on. It doesn't matter what group, what name you put on. Local groups don't have a voice because they're pretty much shut down before they can get to anybody. And that's what's going on in the Gulf. They don't want the truth coming out. And it's not going to come out from multimedia, typical media, radio or TV.
No chance. No way.
No, they won't allow it. And that's part of the cover-up. And the only way you get the truth, Jeff, is to get it from the people on the scene, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this. You've been in media for so many years, more than 2 decades. You understand that